Good evening to your viewers and welcome back to Startup Speaks. Atul, can I request you and Pratik to be on cam because you're both off cam? Atul as well, please. Right. At the outset, let me just welcome you back after a hiatus and say that this session is brought to you jointly by the Department of Information Technology and Electronics, Government of West Bengal, and also NIPP, together with NASSCOM 10,000 Startups. A few words about NIPP. Now, this is India's largest open innovation platform, and it's an initiative that's been established under NASSCOM 10,000 Startups that's specifically designed to foster sustained engagement between large corporates and the startup ecosystem in India. Now, this nationwide initiative is sector agnostic, and it focuses on fostering a culture of open innovation by strategically aligning with the innovation goals of enterprises and the industry as a whole at large. The program operates in a collaborative model and includes mentorships, workshops, events, curated connects, sharing of best practices, and strategic forecasting that keeps open innovation between enterprises and startups at the helm. And all this, along with its association with Fortune 500 companies and global innovation leaders, provides an ecosystem for innovation like no other. And I'd also like to mention at the outset, rather than at the end, is that this session would not have been possible without the kind help and support of the Government of West Bengal, as also NASSCOM's Industry Partnership Program, and last but definitely not the least, our technology and broadcasting platform and partner, Proho.in. And to make our conversation come to life today, we have with us an esteemed set of panelists. First up, we have Pratik Khare, who is the head of innovation ecosystem at Fidelity Investments. With him, we also have Atul Rai, who is the CEO and co-founder of Statue Technologies, and Ashik Paul, who is the CTO and co-founder of Data Sutra. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and very good evening. Pratik, why don't I start with you and ask you to share a little bit about your journey, with the viewers and how that's shaped the work that you're doing currently.
Thank you, Avik. It's in fact a pleasure to be a part of this panel. Very quickly, so presently I head the Asia Innovation Ecosystem at FMR, Fidelity Investments. And just before this, I was heading the India office of Swiss Government's Innovation Ministry, where for almost 8 years, I had the responsibility to receive Swiss researchers and innovators, the ones that have not yet made it, for example, the people who are working on things that are beyond the horizon, beyond 18 months period, still in the lab cooking up something which is going to change the world market. And at the same time, also work with Swiss corporates to find open innovation partners in India. Those could be corporates or mostly startups or deep tech researchers. Before that, I had a chance to be part of 3 startups. All 3 of them had some sort of exit. So 2 where I was an employee, both startups exited. So I had the chance to really grow something and be a part of the journey from sapling to a tree. And one of which was my own small venture, which I exited. The company kind of still runs in Scotland. And before that, I had a chance to work with a corporate, and I learned the rules of the game almost a decade and a half ago. So that's me. Presently, I have FMR. My responsibility is again to work with the ecosystem at large. NIPP is a very, very strong partner for us, and by extension, also work with startups, try and bring innovative solutions into the organization. And like I said, not just the ones that have already made it, but also try and find the things that are going to change the world. So that's me. I think you're on mute.
So Pratik, it's not just wonderful to have you on your platform to share the insights of your journey, but I'm sure that there are a lot of young, aspiring, and wannabe startup founders who are, engrossed and are going to, literally hang on your lips and perhaps reach out to you later and ask you for advice. I think we've just lost Atul there for a minute. Okay, let's do this. Let's go on to Isaac while we wait for Atul. So Isaac, why don't you tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey? And maybe I'll just preface this with the fact that you, together with an increasing number of startup founders and entrepreneurs today, are doing it very early, are doing it right from the end of the school and whilst you're in college. And you're an influencer in the sense that there is a little bit of an ecosystem around you where there are a large number of students who are looking up to you and saying, all right, I'm not going to finish my college and then do an MBA and then get into an MSc, MNC, and then go abroad and then work for the next 10 to 15 years. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be like Isaac. So tell us about this wonderful journey.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's weirder and more difficult because two of the three startups our timings have a very engineering and college focused background. So all of us, we met through the JU, obviously. We were all studying at Jadavpur University, and pretty early on we realized, I think you would classify ourselves as misfits, right? So you go into college, you see everyone else like going through internships, going through technical lectures and stuff like that. And there's this group of guys trying to do multiple things all at once, trying to see where they excel or marvel at, right? So walking across, like creating a community within college, talking to other people who had similar aspirations brought all of us together. And we started working on these small projects, these concept notes for B plans. That's how it all starts. So you get a group of people together, you network, you communicate, you work on an idea, right? I think that's the seedling, right? So you work on a seedling and getting it to a point where it can be germinated is, I think, a very important journey which a lot of people should go through early in their lives, because the more you are in a structured education format, in a structured workplace and things like that, you kind of, I personally feel, you kind of lose the edge over trying to do something that's out of this world, trying to do something that's way out from the normalcy and everything, right? So I think that we actually look at our early beginnings as a huge advantage rather than a disadvantage, because of the people that we had around us guiding us through and helping us out. Yeah. Right.
So I think just to follow up on that, right? What was your motivation to become an entrepreneur? You've put it in a very pithy sentence. For example, in your LinkedIn profile, you're saying, I prefer developing and creating processes to just following processes. And therefore, when I realized that, I wanted to become an entrepreneur. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think like the most, like when people were lining up for, let's say, getting into a good company, right? People were aligning themselves to the company in order to be the best workforce possible. We were slightly away from all of that and trying to work on an idea which not a lot of people were working upon, right? So the entire concept of creating something, I think Peter Thiel has a really good book on it called 0 to 1. So I think that entire process of going from 0 to 1, that is something that really excited all of us in terms of working on something that no one else is working on and trying to solve something that is as difficult, rather than make a process more optimized, be the best cog in the entire machine, right? You're still just a cog. So I think that entire differentiation was something that we realized pretty early on in our lives, right? Before we had to sit for placements, or else we might as well have and gotten good jobs. We might have excelled in the corporate life as well. But we wanted to explore this before we moved on to that, because we felt like we would never be able to come back to this, because like time flows, right? So I think the entire situation was such that pushed us to the edge. Yeah.
And now I suppose you don't even want to move on to that, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to. More importantly, I think once you get this adrenaline rush, you get this experience, right? It's very difficult to go back to a 9 to 5 and get a paycheck at the end of the month. It's very difficult to adjust back to that life. I would feel. I have no experience of corporates, but definitely.
From someone who's had more than 2 decades of experience, I can tell you it hasn't been 9 to 5 for more than 2 decades, and certainly it's not 9 to 5 anymore for any of the corporates. Atul, we lost you for a minute back there, and just for our viewers, right? It's at least in Kolkata in West Bengal, where I think Oshik is also based. It's the onset of monsoon, so we've got thunderstorms and we've got like raining cats and dogs outside. So in case there is a little bit of a glitch, let the conversation go on. Atul, I wanted to ask you about your entrepreneurial journey and what made you get into entrepreneurship to begin with, and what was your specific motivation for starting up Stack.
So basically, to talk about my background, so basically how it started is I belong from UP, Uttar Pradesh, right? And so when I came back, so I did my master's in AI from Manchester in 2011 and 12. And in 13, I came back, and at that point of time, I was reading a newspaper, and in that there was a news about that in India every hour we are having 300 IPC crimes and 100 murders, right? That means the security is something which is something in a very tough situation in the country. And of course, at the same time, we have very limited police to population ratio in this country, right? So that is where things strike, right? Because if you have studied in UK, or of course UK, because UK is most surveillanced country in this world, right? You have camera everywhere. You not see police everywhere, right? So that is something which is important to stop crime at many places, and it actually helps to the citizen at many points, right? So that is something where, of course, we wanted to work in a domain where we can stop these kind of basically crime and these kind of murders and these kind of IPC crimes. And second most important part is, of course, 70% of these basically crime are repetitive in nature. So these are things which actually, came together to basically invoke us, or when I say us, because we are three founders. So to start something where we can use our skill. So when you go with entrepreneurship, either you go with your skill or either you go with your passion, right? So sometimes it mix with both of the things, right? And of course, sometimes with your passion you learn the skill, and sometimes with your skill you learn the passion, right? So in this case, what happened? We had the passion to solve this problem statement. At the same time, we had the skill, and with that particular thing, we started StackU, and that is where this whole entrepreneurship and everything is started. And now we have created I think we are the first Indian startup working in the homeland security domain, and working with 9 Indian state police forces to help them to catching criminals, terrorists, and all. So this is something which excites us, and this is something we are doing in this area.
Mm-hmm. But tell me this, Atul, I'm really intrigued. What made you hone in on this specific problem? Because you passed out from Manchester, you were still working in the UK, you were doing some research, I think, at the University of Hertfordshire for a bit. When you came back here, when you settled down here and you decided, yes, I want to be an entrepreneur, what was it that brought you to this specific problem as opposed to so many others which are there in the ecosystem?
So basically, as I said, I belong from a very small town in Uttar Pradesh, right? And of course, every small town they have its own kind of a problem. And crime, and this is something which is common in most of the, you talk about most of the states are in small towns, right? So my parents are living in a small town, and every day you hear about something, a new crime happened, a new theft happened, a new murder happened, new loot happened, right? So that is the point. That is something which touch you and touch it very deeply, right? So this is something which is where I wanted to start and utilize my skill, and AI could be a powerful tool, because, as I said, 70% of the criminal are repetitive. That means 70% of the data is repetitive, and if data is repetitive, AI can be a most powerful thing, right? And that is where, of course, this excites me. That okay, this is solving a real problem, because we want food, we want housing, we want security, right? So this is a very fundamental point in a human life. Why not to touch it, right? And India is, of course, it could create basically a leader, kind of a startup in this area. So this is where, of course, we got excited, and we are doing. Of course, we feel that we are doing something really, you can say, impactful. So, and that excites us every day, because every day we are solving a very, very powerful, impactful problem in this country, targeting criminals, terrorists, and all those kind of security and safety statements.
Absolutely. And we're going to hone in on the specific products and how they can be used and how they can be applied when we come to the next round of questions. Let me go back to Prateek in the meantime. And let me ask you, so you were a part of startups, you had your own startups, they had successful exits. So at what point of time, because there again, here is you've kind of broken your mold in the sense that a lot of startups or startup entrepreneurs, they start early, they make a successful exit, and they're looking for the next stream. They're looking for the next startup. And then within 8 or 10 years, they become serial entrepreneurs. But you've kind of moved away from that, saying, okay, I've been here, I've done this, I understand how it is, what it means to build a startup from scratch, to roll it up, to scale it up, to exit. And now I'm going to be, part of the ecosystem in sense of an administrator, in sense of an influencer, in the sense of a visionary who actually builds that ecosystem up, which is precisely what I think you did for the Swiss innovation team or center for India. What led to this change in perspective and this change in career? Because you've continued on that trajectory ever since.
Yeah, brilliant question. I've never really spoken much about this in the past, but while I was doing my MBA full time at a university in Scotland, which is known for entrepreneurship, the reason why I chose that, there I was fortunate to be part of a small team of 5, where I was the youngest, around 28 and a half at that time. There were 4 other members whose average age was around 48, full-time MBA students with me in the classroom. And we were supposed to jointly help up-and-coming Scottish entrepreneurs, right, from deep science entrepreneurs. And I didn't even know the things these entrepreneurs were talking about, because these were professors with, around 30 years of experience, and they were doing something that they would put in human brain and that changes and kills cancer and things like that, right? And we were able to help around 80 to 90, I don't remember the exact number, around, let's say, 85 of these deep science upcoming entrepreneurs in a year. And that's when I realized that even though I didn't contribute to half of them, but to those that I did, I realized that I love this, right? This is my calling. My ability to understand, empathize, and push the entrepreneurs to become the best version of themselves, not just through their products and services offerings, but themselves, right? So they're really good at this, or they're lacking a few things. If I can join them in their journey and catalyze it to, let's say, even by 20%, that brings the most joy to me. And that calling was kind of fulfilled. And then I was lucky to find a platform with SwissNext back then that helped me exercise exactly this, right? Being able to identify the calling of these entrepreneurs and push their boundaries to a limit that they have imagined or they've not even imagined. So that is a very, very joyful experience for me. Of course, I think, not comparing the joy of founding something and then growing it all the way and being able to exit. I see entrepreneurs as 2 kind of creatures. One is that wants to stay on and make a very, very successful exit. I think exits happened to my employers because the founders were very focused on that. So they both kind of got acquired. In my case, I exited because of a visa situation in the UK, maybe a story for another time. The other kind of entrepreneurs just want to create and move on, right? So they don't really care about, they love creating. Of course, it's for making money, but it's also for the joy of creating and then moving on to create something else. So I've seen both, and I don't have preferences, but I think I fall mostly in the second category, where I enjoy the process of creation, like build, operate, transfer. And then if somebody else finds value in it, let them own it, let them run it. If they don't, it'll fall and fail. But yeah, that's the reason why I kind of moved away from being a part of active entrepreneurial journey to being somebody who facilitates and serves the ecosystem.
And throughout this point, so from SwissNext to, you spent some time as a mentor for 500 startups, and of course now your current role at Fidelity Investments. Did you never get this urge to go back and say, all right, you know what, I'm doing it for these guys, and it's contagious, it's infectious. Now I want to go back and get another venture. I want to start creating on my own, like literally with my own hands. Did that ever happen to you, or does it happen to you now, even now? Or?
No, it's a very, very, very valid question. It's just that I think the the experience of helping entrepreneurs a new solution every day is very contagious. So versus being a part of one, now that seems very difficult for me, unless if it happens, if it happens. But right now, it's the process of being a part of small journeys of entrepreneurs, working with these deep science entrepreneurs every day that are doing fabulous things. That is very contagious. And once you get addicted to that, it's difficult to go back to just one thing. That's my take on it.
Great. And we'll be back, of course, with more questions, Prateek. Atul, why don't we move on? You just gave us a little bit of just a glimpse about StackU and why you built it up. Let's hone in on, let's actually do a deep dive on some of the products that you've built there and how they are actually making a difference on the ground. Why don't you take us through maybe 2 or 3 of the main products? Maybe Jarvis.
So basically, so Jarvis is our main project. The whole idea was to, of course, catch a criminal. They said that 70% of the criminals are doing crime, going to jail, come out on the bail because Indian bail system is a bit easier for them, and they come out and they again do the same crime, right? So the problem was for the police is to identify these repetitive criminals to different kind of data which they are getting. Of course, they are getting criminal data in terms of the textual data, audio data, and of course the video data. And in that, video data is most powerful because if you talk about the overall data set in Indian ecosystem, 70% of the data is video data or image data, right? So we started with that. Let's say you are catching a criminal in Delhi, right? And that particular criminal has done some crime in Kolkata, right? How to connect that? Because police in Delhi is not knowing about the criminal in let's say that he had done some crime in Kolkata, right? So this is where you need to have a technology which can connect the dot between these two data sets. And that is where we created this technology where you can register. Because in India, when we started in 16, 17, that point of time, we didn't even have a digitalized criminal record. So we provide a mobile app which can be used by a small police station to register a criminal just by clicking a photo and putting some small criminal data. And another time, let's say another time, that particular criminal being seen somewhere, that can be identified either by the video camera, CCTV camera, which you have. Of course, the government have many CCTV cameras. So that camera can be used to identify that criminals, or maybe if I'm a police officer, I'm doing a roadside checking, I can click a photo and then perform a facial recognition and identify that criminal. So this is where the base starting happens. And so far we have around, we actually help police to collect around 45 lakh criminal records in this country. Out of which we have identified so far, in many crimes, we have identified more than 5,000 criminals so far. And these are the category A kind of criminals in this country. And around 8 terrorist module got busted with our technology, with mini gang analysis and all. And of course, this year we also won National Startup Award from the Government of India for this security domain. So, and many police forces also won many awards for our project in their respective states. So this is what impact we created, and we identified this is a problem statement which India wants to solve, and it can't be solved just putting a police force everywhere. And that is where we started with the government sector. Then we moved toward the private sector. We started helping the private sector, like many top brands like Piramal, Rebel, and many others. Like now we are coming Coca-Cola and different other companies. Now they are using their CCTV cameras to automate their safety and operation protocols. In that way, we basically included security, safety, and operations monitoring without using any human interference. That means AI is automatizing all these tasks using existing CCTV network which you have there. You need not to buy anything new, just the software. That's all. So this is the basically Jarvis is.
And I was particularly interested when you said, Atul, you talked about a crime happening in Kolkata and Delhi. Just to put it into context, this is a live scenario. I mean, over the last 7 to 10 days, there have been these ATM frauds. It started happening in Calcutta, and within literally like 2 or 3 days, exactly the same MO of the criminals, right? It happened in Delhi. And I know that I think police have nabbed a few people in another state altogether. So my question to you, was Jarvis actually used in nabbing the suspects and in cracking the crime? If you can share with us, that is. Or something like that.
Yeah, so basically in many cases, I remember in many of the Punjab police have caught many criminals from Kolkata and vice versa, right? So of course I can't name those criminals. Those are serious crime criminals in this whole state. But yeah, this thing happens, right? Sometimes Jarvis is being used in a different way. for gang analysis, for identifying using existing feeds which are happening. In your case, ATM machines are being used. The CCTV footage from the ATM machines are being used,
Yes.
because when you forge a card, right, you basically go to ATM, and in ATM you have CCTV cameras, and or not at CCTV camera, but sometime outside the CCTV, this ATM machines you have a CCTV camera, where people might by criminal by mistake show their faces, right? So in that way, we have solved many cases, and we have solved many. Uh, we have basically identified many big gangs with this technology in this country. So of course, I mean, there are the cases. I can't reveal exact the name of those cases, but yes, we have done many such thing in India.
That's absolutely fascinating. And we'll be back for more questions. Oishik, why don't we go over to you and ask you more about Data Sutram? I mean, on the face of it, right? This is a cloud-based, AI-driven B2B data marketplace product. But tell us about the nitty-gritties of it. What does it really entail? How does it really work?
Right. So we started off with this idea of creating a location's DNA, right? What we realized is working with government projects like Matir Kotha, which was to subsidize fertilizers based on yield and based on the soil type and stuff like that. Then moving on to more business projects, right? In terms of identifying where to open a store based on the external data that was available in terms of the movement of traffic, footfall, demographics and stuff like that. What we realized was the biggest challenge that this industry had in terms of both retail and B2B problems was primarily the lack of high quality data. And that's where we started. The entire idea of Data Sutram started in order to create a location's DNA through these set of location attributes through which any company can evaluate any market, any locality to up to a street level view, and then take business decisions from, like, let's say acquiring the merchant to even opening a new store there. Various of different problems. The backbone of the entire solutions that we build are this location data, right? And moving on, just to give you some idea perspective in terms of the kind of products we are currently working on, are one type is obviously on the market research front in terms of demand sensing, from our retail clients to pharma clients to even our banking clients. We are helping them evaluate what is the market potential, the estimated market size, what is the total demand that you can have in a particular geography based on external parameters. So the beautiful part about what we are doing here is the fact that the company doesn't need to divulge any internal data to us for us to actually evaluate a market. We do that totally and proprietarily on the external data that is available in terms of satellite, in terms of mobile movement, in terms of POI and stuff like that. That's on the demand sensing end. And on the other end, what we realize, and this is a use case that actually came out of the entire COVID situation, where you had extensive field forces which were primarily landlocked into their homes, right? So you didn't have any mechanism to identify exactly which merchants to target for the banking sector, to which societies to market for the retail sector, right? So we are creating this highly enriched data set in terms of location POIs, points of interest, and enriching that with the location data that we are building. Yeah.
So one of the main sort of predicaments that most startup entrepreneurs face is finding out or figuring out when to scale up and at what point of time to actually go in for investment, to go in for funding. Now, since you've cracked that, Oishik, multiple times over, very successfully, seemingly without a hitch, why don't you advise us on how that gets done? What's the best way to do it?
Sure. I think I wouldn't say without a hitch. I think from outside, it always looks, whenever a startup gets funding, is that they have it easy. They are doing it so smoothly. It's never smooth, believe me. From what I've heard, I think one of the important things to understand whenever to raise funds, and we actually learn that along the entire process, is actually to understand what stage is your company in. So I can't talk about any sector or any every kind of startup, but for let's say a deep tech startup like what we are building, it goes through this entire life cycle of customers, right? From the innovators to the early adopters to the laggards, right? So it's very important to understand what stage is your company is in and what does it need beyond just the money. So the first fund that we raised from 100x.vc, we just had an idea. We were fresh out of college. We had kept the company running on bootstrap for a long time. We didn't know where to go with it, but then we struck the idea of creating this and the minimum viable product in terms of location data, right? So that's why we went to 100x.vc and we got our first very small check as a pre-seed round, right? And after raising that, you have to create some form of validation for the investor as well and the coming investors. So then at that point, we realized that the minimum viable product was okay to let's say sell the story of the idea, but not enough to create the entire like resolve the value proposition and create a market fit. So that's when we tried to raise our next round with the Indian Angel Network, which unfortunately or fortunately so happened right in the middle of the first wave of the entire COVID crisis, where we were able to be nimble enough to actually pivot from our retail clients to creating a pharma product, so as to show them the flexibility of the idea as well in terms of our next investors. So now we are at a stage where we have this minimum viable product, we have market fit in the different segments we are building products in. The next fund that we would raise that would be purely to scale, that would. So I think that's a journey that every founder has to do in order the company needs. It's not just money, it's everything beyond that the investor might do, networking, scaling, and even sector knowledge and everything else. So I think it's a very holistic question that a founder has to ask himself.
Great. And I'm sure a lot of the people and startup founders, particularly in their very early stages, would take not just solace, but great insight from what you just said. Pratik, let me come back to you. Aishik pointed out the COVID wave, and we are still, unfortunately, in India, even as economies have started to open up in the UK, where you and Atul have both studied, as well as in mainland Europe, also in the US to a large extent, to greater or lesser extent. Unfortunately, in India, we were still grappling with the vagaries of the continuing pandemic. So if you take the trajectory from last year in March, and it's way more than a year, it's a year and a quarter already, what were some of the most difficult times that you went through? What were your learnings through that period? And as the economy, I think slowly, very slowly, bit by bit, region by region, city by city, sector by sector, starts to open up again, what's your kind of prognosis for how things are going to play out in terms of the startup ecosystem?
Sure. No, happy to take that. So I think when nobody could have predicted, what was going to come, and it's only when you look backwards, you say that no, this was a black swan scenario, and this could have been done, that could have been done. But as soon as the wave hit us, many startups in our ecosystem, and I know, just focusing on India in this global pandemic, because it's you pointed out it's exactly the same for everybody else in the world, but I'm going to focus only on India and the startup ecosystem here in India, and particularly around Bangalore, Mumbai, etc. Right. So as soon as this started, there were startups that cut costs. The focus was to extend the runway, cut costs, cut especially the variable costs, and the clients stopped kind of paying you the fee for the services, especially for SaaS products. I'm not even going to focus on what our services here. I'm not going to focus on entertainment or leisure and travel. I'm focusing purely on the SaaS industry, and largely, let's say, financial services and so on. There were startups that took a huge hit, and there were two complementary thought processes running in the beginning. One was that startups that don't have any revenue in the third month will shut shop, and this is also what was being said in one of the NASSCOM reports. But they later clarified that it does not include the VC funded startups, because they obviously had some runway money, right? They had some kind of cash reserves that needed to be activated. So once there was a sanity after the chaos started to settle down, obviously there were many people that were let go. Founders took almost 100% cut, There were reduced salary. It's like, people went on diet for 3 to 4 months. And suddenly there was a surge of more ed tech startups, content streaming companies changed all or broke all records, especially in ed tech or otherwise also in entertainment. Slowly, what has started to happen is, like I said, the private equity and VC kind of startups, they did not go as down in the turf as expected. There were more, the down cycle grants that came up. The VC ecosystem came together. The cash reserves were started. The startups pivoted. Many startups pivoted and started to do things that they never imagined they could do. And it's brought them not only revenue but also credibility. I know a few startups, for example, that were supported by Marico Foundation here in India startup ecosystem. And now, if you look at the journey, or I would go beyond 2020, right? So let's compare 2019 and 2020 and 2021. We know that in the first 4 months itself, startups have raised nearly $8 billion, right, in 2020. Just the 4 months. I'm not even accounting for May. Around 15 startups have gone unicorn from India. I think 4 startups have announced their IPOs. So things are looking north, right? Obviously, it doesn't take away the pain that the ecosystem has gone through. It also clearly differentiates corporates and startups that have the resilience and the others that don't. So many people are not cut out for starting up, right? So you have to be in it for a long haul, or you're the one who creates and runs away. It's a choice. It's a lifestyle choice that people make. However, I'm looking now at the positive side of it, right? So you must have heard this many times. That's Uber started right after the 2008 financial crisis. The JD.com in China, that started right after the SARS crisis. I mean, it was a business, but they went online after the crisis. 9/11, there was financial crisis in the US. There was ups and downs. The startup ecosystem is meant for this, right? It is meant to go through ups and downs all around the world. So the new normal, like we say, is going to bring also the new opportunities with it. So people who are starting off right now, for example, they need to be very focused on, is this the right time? Am I solving the right problem? Who's going to buy what? Why? For how much? And how will I get it to them? Right? If you can answer this along with saying, is this the right time for me to start up, or should I rather be doing what I'm doing and wait for the right time? It's a very personal choice that people have to make. In summation, this is my outlook. I think it's more positive than it has been bleak in the last year compared to the years before.
Good. So there's definitely some ray of hope as the economy starts to open up further. Atul, let me go over to you in the same vein. Talk to us about how your venture fared through the deepest times of the pandemic last year. Because if I look at it just on the face of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, solving a security problem, solving any kind of a crime problem, it's a data-driven thing, and that data is coming from movement. So the greater the number of people, the more the movement, the more the likelihood of crime. I'm just giving some random hypotheses here, right? If there are more people, there's more disruption, greater the chances of crime, and therefore the greater the probability that you're going to be asked to help solve it. Now, in a question, in a kind of a scenario, in a milieu where you have 3, 4, 5+ months of deep lockdown, and even in this year, semi-lockdowns, forced social restrictions. So a lot of that congregation, a lot of that people going out in the middle of the night to an ATM store or to do the shop or whatever is curtailed. So in that kind of a milieu, how did you fare, and what was your?
So actually, I mean, it started in a very different manner. Of course, you said rightly that, of course, when the lockdown happened, then all these crimes went down. But good with the government is they basically pay you 3 years advance. So, I mean, you always have a money runway and all. But having said that, in 2019, we decided to also target the private sector, because private sector is something which gives you the scale. Government sector is something which helps you to sustain and give you a lot of money. But if you want to scale larger in your for your organization, you have to go to the private sector. And that is where we identified one very common thing everywhere, that the basic problem is basically the human monitoring, whether it's a security, safety, or operation, anything monitoring. When you put a human to monitor, right, we have a very limited psychological basically capability to monitor each and every camera feed or any kind of minor observation, right? Whether, for example, let's say if I want to identify a particular face in a camera, which is coming, it's a 10p camera, 10 camera, I have a very limited you can say, observation period, right, for the brain, right? So this is something a human brain is having a psychological limitation, and that is where AI was basically playing its role. Having same thing, we wanted to identify the same problem statement in the private sector, and we started targeting the private sector in 19. But what happened when we started targeting, and sometime we wanted to switch from the government to private, then suddenly in March a lockdown came, and we were about to close one of the largest cold drink brand in this country, and the whole thing got shut down. And that point of time, what we did, we changed the whole Jarvis product to solve the problem statement of COVID-19 protocols, because that point of time we wanted to stop the spread, of course. And of course this time also we tweaked our product. So that point of time, what we did, we also brought one more module: security, safety, operation, and COVID-19 monitoring module. And in that, we're identifying whether people are wearing masks, they are following social distancing, they are following thermal camera with the temperature, and all those things were automated by the same camera. And we're alerting to the authorities that these guys are, a crowd is happening here, so this is not being followed. So in that way, we started making our money in that manner. In the second lockdown, what happened? So of course, now again, the disease already spread and the whole hospitals are overcrowded, right? So when you are having overcrowded kind of a thing, again, for the same monitoring part, when you go to the ICUs, right, there's a rule for 1-to-1 monitoring or 1-to-2 monitoring. So every patient is being monitored by at least 2 patients are monitored by one ward boy or maybe one nurse or one this doctor, right? But in India, again, we have very limited patient to doctor ratio, right, or nurse ratio. So, and Supreme Court already given the guideline to the hospital that they have to put cameras in the ICU wards, right? So we further modified Jarvis to monitor the screen, the vital screen which is there, which is basically giving you the SpO2 and the thermal temperature and everything on the screen. Now we started using the same camera to give alert about every bed. So you need not to have a nurse sitting over there. Anything, let's say SpO2 is dropping beyond 85, doctor will get an alert on their mobile phone that that particular screen is showing. So in that way, we started basically, as you say, as told that you have to be nimble, right, in your approach. And this is something every entrepreneur try to do, because there is always up and down, right? But the fundamental is always same, right? We wanted to utilize this video and image data to solve this problem statement of the automation, and we are still following it. And we're still closing. Actually, in the lockdown period, people want to move to the automation, and that is somehow it is good for us. And people realize that automation can bring a lot of things. So in that way, COVID somehow helped us in that manner to basically fast forwarding the people towards the automation thing. And that realization came to it is actually, I mean, not that basically threatening to us, but at the same time, we also tweaked our product to solve those problem statements which are useful for the common citizen and maybe the hospitals and some kind of a scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Oishik, you mentioned that just around the start of the first wave is when you got your big sort of funding investment from Dave. So tell us how you were able to tide over this entire period of the deep forced lockdowns, and whether, as Atul mentioned, right, a lot of companies started looking at innovation, started looking at technological disruption at a much faster pace than they did. It was happening. It has been happening off and on for the last, the greater part of a decade. And there's lots of reports around this, which is again a conversation for another time. But what was happening, according to some of us who were talking to people and stakeholders, is their employers and stakeholders and industrialists were looking at this to say, okay, is there an opportunity? Can I still be able to run businesses by automating and going more and more into the technologically intensive business process and saving on labor, but also saving on the risk of people coming together and congregating and having to work together? What was your own experience during this entire time and now also?
Right. Yeah, I think like Pratik very rightly mentioned, when an industry is not making money, how can they pay for a SaaS platform, right? So very simply, that's what happened after our first fundraise. One of our, like, the most of our largest clients were in the retail space, right? And with the COVID and the lockdown, everything, every shop being shut, people are like, why would I optimize my inventory based on your data when I don't have a shop to run in the first place? And luckily, there was one of our, like I said, I think the basic question for a startup at this earlier stage is, can you survive a new situation which can throw a spanner in your plans or not? Like, you have to thrive in adversity, or else you are not meant to thrive in the first place, right? So luckily, one of our pharma retailers, they looked at our demand sensing problem, right? They had, and if you realize, one of the biggest challenges that these retailers were facing at the beginning of the pandemic was people buying masks like a Black Friday sale, right? So you had masks going out, you had no hospitals not being able to procure masks at one point because of the extreme spike in retail sales, and their internal forecasting models wouldn't be able to predict anything like that because it's not privy to the external disruptions that are happening around it. But we, on the other hand, since we were already tracking all this external data at a location level, it made all the more sense to take this data and help them forecast demand at a geography level, right? To understand exactly which geographies require what kind of volumes in terms of mask, sanitizer, and all the essential segments. So I think that's what we did, because we realized that now once you are in this entire investment done, it's a marathon. You can't stop. You can't just reduce your operations and like just hope to survive till the end of the year. You have to show them returns, you have to show them value. So we decided to shift our focus to the essential space and try to work out how our entire location intelligence can become a huge mover in the demand space, in terms of sensing demand, in terms of tracking demand, in terms of tracking movement with geographies were locked down. And I think what this lockdown essentially did, very simple, very like very much like what Atul was talking about, it reduced the entire adaptation life cycle. So what was happening was, up until the entire COVID hit, a lot of these tech products which were new age, which required adaptation, right, for companies who were used to their internal processes, they were forced to try these out. They were forced to try out new ideas. They were forced to be inventive, innovative themselves. That's why I think what happened essentially was it cut down the entire adaptation life cycle, which in a normal situation would have probably taken a year or so for them to be used to it. They had to very quickly give these things a go and quickly get it into their internal business process, into their operations and things like that. So I think it gave a lot of these startups a good chance, an opportunity to actually position themselves as a necessary product than some, like a, I would say, an antibiotic over a vitamin, right? So that entire thing flipped on its head, which was a very, I think, I wouldn't say important and or fortunate, but rather a opportunity for a lot of these startups.
Great. And Ashik, we've alluded through this conversation at many different times that this is what a startup founder should do, this is what he should not be, etc. So why don't we do a very quick round of this? Maybe Ashik, you, and then Atul, and then I'll go back to Pratik with a broader version of that question. If we are looking at any startup entrepreneur in India today who is thinking or struggling, okay, am I going to be on my feet? Am I going to get through 2021? How can I take things forward? What would be your advice? Very briefly, because we've got a couple of audience questions as well. Ashik, why don't you go first?
I would say think on your feet, and I think one of the things that really helped us out at the beginning of this entire journey was, I would say, fail fast and learn faster. So it's inevitable. We are hit with situations we have never faced. So you are bound to fail as a startup, as a founder. But the faster you learn from it and the faster you can get back on your feet, it's a huge benefit and a step towards the right direction.
Good, great. Atul, what's your advice? What's your motto?
So basically, I mean, one learning in the last 5-6 years we have that because when we had all the three founders were engineering background, and I was having AI background, so we are very fascinated towards the engineering and research part, right? But soon we learned one very important thing, that rather than just, because when you have a skill, you always want to use it everywhere, and then you start focusing in that domain, and then you are basically going for the goal only, right? You're just thinking of the goal. So I would say you should create a system rather than the goal every time. So system is something, because you have to have a sales team, you have to have a business team, you have to have an engineering team, you have to have a research team. We as a engineering background graduates, right, we wanted to target everything with engineering, right? And that is something which is dangerous, right? So you have to have diversified system in your team. You have to have a business team, you have to have sales team, you have to have marketing team, you have to have, so these are different components which are important for scaling up a startup. So you have to first focus on the architecture and the system, and of course you have to set up a goal and the, whatever you say, the vision and all those things. But a system is very important part, and whether you are putting a single person or a single person doing those multiple jobs for both of the system thing, but you should follow first, create a system, and then of course you can make your goal and all. So this is learning I have, and so far, yeah.
Great. And Pratik, your views on this?
Sure, I have two hats, and if you allow me, I can kind of share both very briefly. From entrepreneurs' point of view, I think um, might be controversial, but I think there is this entrepreneurial arrogance which I find very, very useful. The entrepreneurial ego, to say that I want to create something, and the reason why probably Isaac started was he didn't want to be told what to do, right? So having that is very, very important, especially when the chips are down. Saying that I will decide what I will do, I will decide what my company does. Having that entrepreneurial arrogance and ego is very important, which I found useful to fuel me when my chips were down. For example, doing my company in a country where I didn't belong, right? So that was very useful for me. The point that I said earlier, right? So problem solving. Is this a problem that people are willing to pay for, right? So, and how much? Who's going to buy what? Why? For how much? And how will you get it to them? I think you've got to keep asking yourself, so what? So what? Every time as an entrepreneur, as a mantra, whether you're making profits or not. So these are the two qualities, and obviously the third one is resiliency. That comes along with the entrepreneurial ego. So if it doesn't work, you got to keep trying, pivot. If there is an opportunity which is better than this one, having the ability to leave this and solve a bigger, better problem, and making that decision when to transition to a bigger problem is more art than it is science. The second hat for me is the ecosystem enabler hat, where I want entrepreneurs to take their time, think through, and that is exactly what Atul was saying. Right? So think through your business model, think through the systems approach, think through when you're scaling, especially when you're scaling. Have you looked at your competition more horizontally and vertically? Not just hockey stick and cross marks and saying that, oh, this is a feature comparison, I do better here, I do better there. Why is your competitor doing something that they're doing, and why are they better than you at it, right? And there's something to learn from, because you will have to take away their customers, for example. So it's a time invested in studying competitor strategy is very, so things like that, right? So there I want, as an enabler, I want startups to talk to me through their strategy, and where I can, or there's a very, very strong startup ecosystem. NASSCOM is at the center of it. There is a lot of help available in India than it was 10 years ago. There is a lot of openness to help, whether people are asked or not asked. There's an attitude of giving back to the ecosystem. So that needs to be utilized. And there I rest my case.
And Pratik, before we go to audience questions, something else that I wanted to touch upon, which is also very close to my heart personally, is the future of work. And I know that you have very definite ideas about the future of work and sort of alternate models and scenarios which we should be keeping in mind when venturing forth into the future. Why don't you give us a little gist, little flavor of that?
Sure. Thanks, Avik. This was I had the opportunity to make a very small TEDx talk, and to summarize that, I think that the alternative future work is not so different from what it was let's say 100 years ago. I believe that the future of work has at its center the human will and the vision that an individual has, and the technology plays a peripheral role, right? So technology, for example, people are afraid of it replacing human beings and taking away a lot of jobs, which is, I don't disagree with it, but I'm saying that technology has created more jobs than it has disrupted. If we look back very closely, there are geographies and economies that are at unprecedented advantage because of a young labor force and so on. So if we look very closely, the future of work again has the intent and the ability to centralize the work that we do, and I'll summarize with just 3 words, right? So don't work for getting your paycheck. If you don't know what your calling is, it will come to you, and work incessantly. Work because you love work, not because somebody else tells you to work. And this is a bit more entrepreneur, going where Isaac started talking, saying that, or you started saying, I don't want to follow processes, I want to create few. And this is my whole let's say philosophy of future of work, saying that it is more human centered, and technology plays a very, very peripheral roles around the future.
Great, and we can always have maybe an offline conversation about this sometime. We've got a couple of interesting questions. So before we end for the day, let's take up Chandok's question quickly. And I'll paraphrase this. Atul, I guess I'm going to ask this to you. It's a question of fraud, and it's a question of protection against that. So is there any software or any mechanism or integrated suite of softwares that can make it completely foolproof? So think of the ATM fraud, the example that we took, or any of the other sort of times.
So basically, I mean, when you talk about any kind of a thing, right, whether it's a hacking, which you call a cyber crime and all, right? So this is a business, right? And every business evolves. For them, it is a business. Even crime is a business, right? So they want to upgrade themselves. So there is no as such a foolproof plan for anything, right? Because it is more like when you say, I mean, cat and my story or rat story, right? You upgrade yourself, they upgrade themselves, and that way it is always happening. Of course, there are certain basic protocols which you need to follow, whether it's a ATM machine kind of a thing, or whether it's a online password mechanism and all, right? Every day, every time there are 16 billion or 16 million password basically come on online for basically purchase and different things, right? Happening every year, some passwords got from some website get hacked and basically been presented on the dark web and all, right? So in that way, of course, there are the protocols. You have to change your password frequently and all those stuff. So those are basically a rule. I mean, it is more like where you are prevention is better than the cure kind of a thing, right? So that is the only rule you have. There is no such foolproof plan. Every day we came up with facial recognition technology. Criminal came up with the mask and helmet. They wear a helmet while doing the loot, right? So we have to upgrade our technology for the gait analysis. Then they are coming with new things, right? So this is even a cat and mice story. You have to be more protective in that terms. And this is my take so far. Whatever the experience I have seeing the crime and all.
Great. We've just come to the top of the hour, and it's been absolutely engrossing and deeply, from a personal standpoint, enriching. As a founder of a fledgling startup myself, there are definitely insights and takeaways that I've made mental notes on, and I'm going to apply in my own venture. And I'm sure many of the viewers who are watching will feel the same, and they've probably been making notes as we've gone. This has been really, really great talking to you, Prateek, Atul, and Ashik, and hope to get you back again soon. And for our viewers, hope this was great after a hiatus for last month. And we'll be back again, same time next month, with another edition, a brand new edition of Startup Speaks. Until then, stay safe to the extent possible. Stay indoors, stay well. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Avik.
Thank you, gentlemen.